Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. Our topic this time is influence, empowerment, and politics. And of course, we're going to take an organizational perspective as we look at these topics. Here's our learning objectives. By the time we get done engaging with this material, you ought to understand the dynamics of influence tactics in the organization, the use and accumulation of social power, describe the five bases of power, explain empowerment, be able to recognize the elements of organizational politics, and learn enough about impression management to incorporate it into your personal managerial style. Let's start out with organizational influence in the sense of influence tactics, generic influence tactics. So I'm going to give you 9 different tactics, and these are in the order of most used tactic, diminishing down to the last one, which is number 9. And what is interesting here is that the first 5 tactics are soft tactics, and the last 4 are considered hard tactics. So let's just jump right into it. The most used generic tactic to influence people is the use of rational persuasion. And it's simply that. You try and convince people to your point of view by using logic. And certainly if you have facts, then you use those facts to support your argument. The second influence technique is inspirational appeal. And this is where someone will appeal to another person's values and usually their emotions in some way. You might hear someone say something like, do it for the team. Um, or you're the only one we can rely on. Trying to get an emotional response or reply, or really get at a person through their direct values that they hold. So it's an inspirational sort of appeal. And those are powerful. And that's why it is the second most used generic influence tactic. The third one is consultation. Simply, we are working with others. And so that is a powerful tactic and it works. It's not threatening. And we see more consultation all the time. Certainly, working in committees and task forces in organizations is a way to let this consultation work itself out. So we incorporate the opinions of others, and we appreciate their efforts, and we learn to work together as a team. The fourth soft tactic of generic influence really is ingratiation. And this again is somewhat of a play on emotion and so forth, like an inspirational appeal would be. Um, and you might hear someone say something, I picked you because you're the smartest, trying to, the phrase is butter you up, so to speak, or to really flatter you in a way that the person thinks will give them the result in the change of your thinking that they're looking for. It is the fourth most used tactic. Um, and then finally, on the soft tactics, the fifth one is personal appeal. Um, Personal appeals hit us on a couple of different levels. Um, it might be a form of rational persuasion mixed certainly with an inspirational appeal and maybe a little bit of ingratiation because we know the person well enough to make it a personal appeal. So you could hear somebody say something like, well, you're my best friend. You've got to help me out. No one else will help me. That's a personal appeal, but it's also, when you think about it, got that the level of emotion to it and so forth, the ingratiation, the way you tell a person that no one else can help you but them. It's very flattering. Well, let's take a look now at the last 4 generic influence tactics, hard tactics. Um, Exchange is number 6. Exchange is simply do something for me, I'll do something for you. Um, so you might hear things phrased, if you do this, I'll owe you one. Or if you do this, I'll do that. That's a simple exchange, and there is a bit of this going on out there in social activity and interaction. It might be neutral, it might be positive, it might be a negative experience, depending on who the participants are and what the agendas of those participants are. Number 7 is the hard tactic of coalition tactics. Now, the first thing, when you see that word coalition, you should immediately think of politics. Coalition tactics are political activity. And here is when you try to get another person to support your point of view on some issue. So you therefore are trying to build a coalition. And you can start as small as a coalition of 2, because if 2 people begin to share the same viewpoint on something, then they will pressure other people and they will try and add people to their coalition. And so it is very much considered political activity when you build coalitions. And people might say something to you like, well, I really need you on your side. I hope I can count on you for this because we think alike on this, something like that. The 8th tactic is also a hard tactic. It's pressure. I think we all know what pressure is. It's coercive. That's why it's a hard tactic. Um, it's the sense of do it or else. It's really about using threats and intimidation. It's a hostility tactic. It really is. And that's why it is so far down on the list of most used tactics. But it is out there. And finally, our 9th influence tactic is a hard tactic, is legitimizing tactic. And what legitimizing tactics are is really referring to, in less than subtle ways, to your authority and implying that authority supports what you're saying or what you're asking or what you're telling people to do. So these last 4, certainly are considered hard tactics. And in each of them, there is a little bit of pressure. There's a little bit of legitimizing tactics in each of them in an exchange. Some things are implied subtly, or maybe just through inference. Um, so research tells us, does any of this stuff really work? So that's what we really ought to be focusing on. Well, the thing is, uh, influence tactics do work, these generic influence tactics. But the soft tactics are the ones that really are effective, and they work the most. And honestly, most hard tactics that you see here, these 4 hard influence tactics, end up being ineffective because you build opposition, you build resentment, you tear down trust, you break bridges. Um, you're not acting in a collaborative, a consultative, or participative sort of manner with other people. And if you're a manager and you're using these sorts of tactics with your workforce, you really need to rethink your philosophy of style and so forth. Now, I will say one thing about these 9 tactics. These generic influence tactics apply mainly to North America and to a certain extent most of Europe. So this is a Western notion of how we live in our Western society as opposed to Eastern society, which is much more Asian. And of course, the East is incredibly varied with differences in different societies and so forth. But um, generally what we see is these tactics that we use um, around the world because of cultural differences, they're just not appropriate. They're appropriate in the West, but they are inappropriate in the rest of the world. Now, really what we want to accomplish when we're trying to convince someone or to use our influence in a way to get a certain result, to work out a problem or a challenge, or to just solve a task that we have a mutual goal. Um, a mutuality of interest is really about creating a win-win situation. And if you strive for a win-win situation, you more or less undertake a constant balancing act between your self-interest and a mutuality of interest. Now, a mutuality of interest means if 2 parties are working on solving some challenge together, some problem that they have to work out, the general way we see things done in American culture is winner takes all. And we focus very much on being the winner. And that's not what mutuality of interest is about. Mutuality of interest is much more enlightened, I would say. You want to create a win-win situation for a lot of obvious reasons. Um, for managers, creating win-win situations where there's no clear winner and the other person is a loser, and generally it's in a big way. Big winners, big losers. And if you're on the big loser side of it, or even the loser side, period, you don't feel powerful, you don't feel appreciated, and so forth. So for managers, the idea is to use a mutuality of interest approach to create win-win situations where you do the best that you can to help everybody achieve their interests to the extent that you're able. And so this creates a climate of shared ownership, and it does make a stronger organization and a stronger organizational culture. So, if done successfully, working from a viewpoint of mutuality of interest, is employees view their own self-interest is much more in alignment with those of the organization, maybe even the same if you're really lucky. But it does require most of us as Americans to change a little bit of the way we think. We're an extremely competitive society, no doubt about it, and we are used to having winner take all, and winner is number one, and there's a clear winner and a clear loser. But in the world of business and in the public sector and in the nonprofit sector, we're really talking about a mutuality of interests. We ought to be talking about how can we have the best result for all parties involved. And so it is what it is, but we shouldn't overlook that it takes a little effort to change your general mindset from winner takes all to win-win situations. Now, to accomplish a lot of things in an organization, you need to exercise social power. And social power has a variety of dimensions to it. And as you see here, it's defined as the ability to get things done, and you do it using your human, informational, and material resources. Together, those things that you've cultivated over time are the basis of your social power. Um, so it's not just, oh, you're working with the people who work for you as a human resource. You're working, you're looking at them as social power, as people who appreciate the fact you've treated them with respect and equity, that you've used teamwork, that you've been consultative, and indeed you've shown that you have their best interests at heart as well as the interest of the organization. That's how you build some social power. You increase the social capital that you have with each individual person, and then of course you use the information at your fingertips that you have access to, and any other material resources you have, the most efficient and best ways you can, and all those things together will be whether or not you're successful in getting things done. So we have two types and dimensions of this social power, or I should say personal power, power itself, personalized and socialized. So there is that distinction. And even though I'm kind of messing up the definition a bit here, I think you see the difference. We can have uh, a dimension of our power that comes from our authority, from our personal charisma, our management style, all of that stuff there would be personalized. But our socialized power is doing what I've been saying here, where we use everything that all our skills and abilities and intuition in a socialized way to get things done working with other people. So there are different ways of looking at power, and this idea of dimensions is just one way. So let's just break it down in the most basic terms. Socialized power is using the power that you have, which is really influence. So let's put it that way, your influence in a way that helps others. And your personalized power is using your power or your influence to help oneself. So there's nothing wrong with using power or influence to help yourself, as long as it's an ethical use, as long as it's appropriate. But most of the time, we are social animals as people. In our organizations, we generally rely on our personal attributes, and then we act through our socialized basis of power. Um, Now, we can identify who is using personal power and socialized power in the workplace pretty easily. We can identify this by managers who focus on their own needs rather than the needs of their subordinates. Uh, that means that you've identified an organizational dynamic, personalized power. And then you could also notice that some managers are strong on the rules, but they don't follow the rules themselves. Again, that's not a use of social power, that's a use of personalized power. So these things are simply concepts that you can use as tools to help you understand better the dynamics of what's going on in any given organization. So again, we come back to this idea that if you use social power, you're probably in a stronger position. Um, you come around to the idea that empowerment is part of mutuality of interest. Empowerment is part of win-win thinking. So these are all facets of a managerial style that you can adopt. There is really no place for authoritative management in this type of setting in the organizational dynamic that I'm trying to describe here. Now, certainly there is another element of this, and it's called delegation. Now, delegation is that highest degree of empowerment. So if you are able to empower people, what you are doing is distributing your power. You're distributing your influence to get things done. This is very much a win-win situation when you think about it. It develops your employees' abilities and it lightens your own workload. Now here we have a conceptual look by a couple of scholars, um, French and Raven. They wrote some articles in a book as well in the early 1960s, and they said this is the basis of power that is out there in organizations, because we are looking at this from the organizational perspective. These are the basis that managers, leaders, owners, and so forth derive their power from. So let's just take a real quick look at it here. Um, Referent power. Based on the identification that someone has with the leader, do they like the leader? Do they think they are competent? Do they think they are highly competent? That they are very professional? That they know what they're talking about and that you could trust what they say? If that's the case, then they are exercising some referent power. And you would refer to them. If they said something and you needed advice, you might go to someone that you feel has referent power. Here they use the example of a teacher. This is totally possible. But think of it, it could also be your pastor or priest or imam or rabbi or whatever it might be. They might have certainly some referent power because of what they represent and who they are individually. Now, that is slightly different from expert power because this is about your perception of that individual as a true expert who knows the facts, who, if you ask them a question about some specific topic, they will know the accurate and correct answer. And so we find all kinds of experts. Many of your professors are experts in various fields and so forth. And they would have expert power. They might also, a few of them, have referent power if they had stayed around a long time and were highly respected for their thinking and their equity and so forth. I would say on campus, if you wanted to pick out a professor who had referent power, I would say Dr. John Langton. He has referent power, but he also has expert power because, hey, I've seen him on TV. I've seen him interviewed many times in short little snippets on Channel 13 about the college, about politics, about some political thing that's going on. And people listen to what he says because he is indeed an expert. We also have, as a basis of power, legitimate power. Now, this comes from the job that you hold. And this is very much Western society. It's very much America. That we don't bring any particular authority, formal authority, to our jobs. The authority's in the job description itself. The duties are laid out. And you can either boss people around or you can't. You're either a manager and a supervisor or you're not. And so legitimate power is associated with your formal power in a particular position of employment. So a judge has legitimate power to administer a sentence according to the law. That particular judge could be an expert or they may not in some particular type of law. And then reward power. Now, reward power kind of cuts across a lot of lines. Your reward power is derived from your capacity to actually provide a reward to someone. So supervisor is really in a position to provide a certain level of rewards for their supervised employees. When you think about it, I mean, the supervisor sets the schedule. They give the approval for flexible hours if needed, and whatever might come up with work-life balance issues and so forth, they have a reward power. So this can either be used for good or bad or for neutral purposes, right? But reward power does exist. And so we can see that these four are quite different from each other. Now, here's the one that really we always want to stay away from, particularly in organizations as leaders and managers, the coercive power. This is authoritarian power. It's derived from having the capacity. It might be because you have some certain level of legitimate power and you don't use it to consult with people and participate together with them and empower them. No, you use it to intimidate and coerce and use the hard tactics of influence and direction, like I was talking about earlier. So you have the capacity to penalize or punish. If you can fire someone, you have a certain level of coercive power. If you tell about it all the time and mention it and talk to your employees, I can fire you anytime, you are exercising your coercive power because you're intimidating people. But even here, the example is a good one. A coach who benches a player for being late to practice, that's coercive power, but it's also at the same time legitimate power. So some of these have a little bit of overlap and it just makes some sense. But when you think about it, this covers the main areas. And that's why since the early 60s that this particular concept has stuck around with us and is always talked about in every organizational behavior class. Now here's a little bit about empowerment or empowerment. Empowerment comes about through using participative management. And it is really the ability to do some delegation. So participative management is really, you may recall if you've taken fundamentals of management that we have Likhart's managerial styles of behavior. And there are four systems, systems 1 through 4, and the systems represent a continuum of managerial behavior, how they act in the workplace towards their employees. And system 1 on the far left of the continuum is exploitative of their employees, and it's very authoritarian. And system 2 is exploitative, but it's benevolent. It's a little bit more behind the scenes, but it's just as exploitative. And it's just as authoritarian, but wears a different guise. System 3 is where we really start to get into modern day managerial thinking of empowerment. We have consultative behavior where you talk to your employees. You realize they're probably experts in the work that they do and you could learn a lot from them. And you work together. That is the beginnings of participative management. And then system 4, of course, is consultative, where you actually go beyond just the consultative, but the participative side. You bring people in, and indeed, you start enriching their jobs by delegating some of your power. So if you have to be called several times a day to give a simple yes or no answer to approve something from one of your employees trying to get some work done, maybe it's time to think about that one task, delegating that power to say yes or no, should we proceed without talking and calling the boss every time? You have just delegated some work. That's what delegation work is. Now, managers need to do this because you are certainly overloaded in your workload and you work way too many hours a week. So it works perfect. It is a mutuality of interest, a win-win situation for managers to do delegation. Get rid of some of your work and at the same time enrich another employee's experience by giving them some low-level responsibility. That way, their job is enriched. They feel like they're getting some professional development. Indeed, you are building trust and you're building teamwork. And this is all called empowerment. Now, there are plenty of barriers out there to delegating. And this is all on the side of managers. These are personality flaws or managerial flaws in leadership style and so forth. For instance, lack of confidence or trust in your employees. Well, certainly it's tough for people to give up their work if they don't have confidence the employees can do it, or they simply don't trust them. But on the other side of the coin, it could be that the manager just has low self-confidence and just doesn't want to turn over any work whatsoever. Doesn't know how to go about it, feels bad that maybe the employee is going to think bad of them or something because you've given them more work and so forth. Your self-confidence is personally low. Um, Really, managers like this, we hope that too many managers aren't like this, particularly those with low self-confidence. You do have to have a certain level of self-esteem to be a manager, to be in front, to be in charge, to be that role model. So low self-confidence is certainly a barrier to many things, and delegation happens to be just one on a long list if you're not self-confident. And then down here on the lower left, believing that if you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. This is a complete fallacy, and any manager who believes this will end up working themselves to death. You have to be able to have trust in people. If you don't have confidence they can do the job, then why don't you train them to do the job? There are many ways to solve these sorts of problems. You can build confidence in your employees. You can build trust by working together with people, but it does take a little bit of effort. The attitude doing, if you want it done right, I'm the only person on earth that can do it right, is really an egotistical idea, and good managers have to stay away from this sort of thinking. It's as bad as saying there's only one best way to do things. Oh, but in this case, I'm the only one best way. So when you really think about it, it's totally based on ego. It's not based on building a trusting, working relationship in a workforce. And then this one here is uh, really something that you shouldn't worry about in the workplace. Fear of competition from subordinates. Oh, if I give them some of my work and they do such a great job, they're going to get my job. They're going to become the manager and I'm going to be out the door. My boss will notice that they did that terrific, and all of a sudden I have to worry about they're going to replace me. Well, this is simply nonsense. It's simply nonsense in the sense that you want to take the kudos when somebody does something good. The first thing you want to do is say, I've delegated some work. I'm going to monitor this employee carefully to make sure we get it right. But I think they're growing in development and we have some good potential from them in the future. And you talk to your boss about it if you feel you need to, or if it even comes up when you do discuss your employees. And your boss is going to look at that like the same way he would look at giving you some of his delegated work to grow you professionally. Ah, you're doing the right things that managers should do. Managers should not worry about this. You're hired. Today's hiring and selection is all about the KSOCs, the key skills, abilities, and other characteristics of workers. And so people are chosen by the very specific things that they can do. Um, so we don't want to worry about those sorts of things. Organizational politics are always with us. We can't escape from this stuff. Um, we we have politics on different levels. Coalitions can be as small as just two people. If they're loud enough and vocal enough, they certainly will get noticed. So when we talk about organizational politics, a lot of times what we see here, this is about preserving uh, self-influence of some particular manager. So most organizational politics really are self-serving, people acting out their own agendas, looking out for themselves, and so forth. Um, Most of the time, you have to look at this as a matter of human nature, but it's obvious to most people when they see organizational politics that someone saying something, doing something, they're using one of the bases of power, like maybe ingratiation with a boss to move themselves ahead, and you see this happening. Well, when you do see something like that, then boom, you say, ah, I'm an educated person. I've just noticed a dynamic in the workplace, the organizational dynamic of politics right in front of me. People do these things, and it is human nature. You can't let it destroy your day. Um, Now, we do have that three different levels of political activity. We're always going to have some political activity in organizations because we always have some level of political activity in real life. And the workplace does reflect real life. So our three levels of action, political action, are individual, coalition, and network. Each level of activity kicks up the activity a little bit. Um, where when we get to the network level, we see alignments of more than just two people, like in coalitions. We start to see alignments of groups of individuals who are pursuing their own self-interests, and they just happen to coincide for the current time. So these three levels of political action do appear in organizational uh, politics. Now, when it comes to political tactics, what we're really talking about is basically a lot of undesirable behavior in the workforce. And in the workplace in general, we don't have time to waste on this nonsense. Um, in the book, the authors give us a really excellent table uh, that talks about this and gives a lot of information on the variety of political tactics and so forth. And you can read through that material, and I think you'll see what it's about. But the list does begin with blaming others and so forth. And it's really uncertainty, though, in your organization that will trigger a lot of political behavior, very similar to what we see happening with the grapevine. Um, if you disseminate the right amount of correct and timely information in your organization, you can avoid a certain amount of political activity, and you can avoid a certain amount of activity on the grapevine. But it is uncertainty that triggers a lot of political activity. So get the facts out there if you see this and start to hear political activity and tactics being used, building coalitions, networking, people standing around spending a lot of time talking about what they would like to do or see done and so forth, instead of actually getting the work done. So that's what we have to really be on guard about. You don't want your workplace to turn completely political. And it can even be taken over by other forces that are external to the organization, not just what's going on in that internal dynamic within your own culture. External politics of the nation will come into the workplace, and it can make the workplace toxic. And so we certainly have seen that in the last few years of the current political turmoil in the country, and so forth. So we just want to be careful that we don't let that sort of thing happen to us in our organizations. Well, one thing we can do is this notion of impression management. So it's probably a good thing to wrap up our discussion with this. Impression management will lead us away from a lot of this political activity, which generally results in strife and tension and stress in any given organization. Impression management is about making that good impression. And it is about trying to control the impression or perception others have about either yourself or the organization. So impression management is really on a couple of levels. On that individual level, where you want to present yourself in a certain way, you're managing the impression you make, and you also want to do the same thing with your organization. And of course, the reputation that an organization has, or its brands or its products, certainly are the result of how good or bad you've been, or the amount of luck and good fortune you've had in your impression management. Um, in plain language, impression management is really about getting others to see us in a certain light. Um, I think we've talked about in the past about self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is that ability that we all have to change our behavior depending on the circumstances we're going to be in. So when we go for a job interview, we put on a suit or our best clothes, we dress up, and we look professional, or what we believe is considered professional for that job. Or if we're going to go work out or hang out, we may put on some more athletically inclined attire, shoes, clothing that are more appropriate and suitable for that. And so, depending on what we're going to do, we are chameleons. And this is really called self monitoring, where it is a big part of impression management, actually. The steps that we take to change our behavior, our appearance, whatever it takes to make sure that we're presenting the impression that we think is appropriate for that particular situation. So we're all chameleons as humans. And I think the more educated we get, the more time we do spend with our impression management. There's a lot of research in this area, actually. Those individuals who are high in self-monitoring, they're much better at their overall impression management. Um, Now, believe it or not, there are those individuals out there, and maybe you didn't really think about it in this terms before, who are just set on making a bad impression on purpose. And maybe you've seen this happen. I know I have. And believe it or not, some people actively try to make themselves look bad. This is also a facet of impression management, making yourself look bad. And people do this for psychological reasons, obviously. Uh, the big one is avoidance. People that want to make a bad impression uh, want to make sure they don't get assigned any additional work or responsibility. In fact, they don't want any of your managerial work delegated to them. They might be of the opinion that I don't get paid enough here, and I don't want you giving me more work. You're not going to pay me anymore. Why should I take on the responsibility? And if I don't do a good job, I could get fired. So they make a bad impression on purpose to make sure that they don't get assigned any additional work. It's avoidance. Also, it's to obtain concrete rewards. It's a little bit of reverse psychology, you might say. They're looking for a pay raise by doing less than the managers know that you can do. Now, of course, that's a risky tactic. You could lose your job, but maybe you're really good at it. And you've proven over some period of time that you're better at it than anyone else. So you've got a risky attitude here that you think by doing a bad job or creating a little bit of a stir, that you're going to get something positive out of it. This is really faulty logic, but people do that all the time. Um, it could also be that people try and make a bad impression because they have an exit strategy. They want to be fired. And so they make a bad impression on purpose. And then later on, they go, I worked really hard. I was there a year and a half. And all of a sudden, the last few weeks, they didn't like me much, or I don't know what happened. And they get fired. And the whole thing was they wanted to be fired. That's why they started that. And sometimes people do that. They make a bad impression. They want to be fired, and they might not own up to it. That's really what it's all about. They might not really want to admit it. Um, and then the final way I've got for you about making a bad impression is for power. Sometimes people will try and make a bad impression, trying to manipulate or control a situation in some way. Maybe make someone else look bad in the process also. So maybe you won't have anything in particular happen to you by the little bit of bad impression you might create, but because what you're doing is involved with someone else's doing, it may make them look especially bad. And so that is a very hostile tactic. People do these things simply for power. And they're exercising power, trying to make someone else look bad, and they think they can take a small hit along the way. And maybe that person will be fired if it's someone they don't want to be around. People are complicated, right? So I just thought it was important that we do talk about making a bad impression because it's something that you're going to encounter and you want to identify it when you see it. And you might even have to confront an employee sometime as part of the hard part of the manager's job and say, what is it with you? You're trying to make a bad impression for what reason? Because this is not what I've seen in the past. And of course, you would do that in the privacy of your office and so forth. Okay, and the final topic to wrap this up is managing these organizational politics. Well, I've really given you the key to it already several times, I think. It's about disseminating information and being open and honest with employees. Give out as much information as possible. Don't hold things back for no reason just because you can. Not everything has to be secret. If the company is doing really well, you don't have to give out the exact numbers, but you could certainly say, wow, sales are way up. And we're really pleased with how we're doing compared to this quarter last year or last quarter or whatever it is. You can do a lot with information dissemination. And that tends to keep politics down as long as you do that. And just be honest and truthful. It creates trust and it builds bridges. And you have to accept the fact that you cannot eliminate politics in the workplace completely. It's just not going to happen as part of the human condition. But you can minimize it, and that's where you have to begin. Try and minimize it by creating creative, supportive cultures of all types that are disseminating information, that allow people to see the benefit of working together, and also to let them know that our managerial style in the organization is based on participative management, on contingency management, where we work together for the good of the organization. Okay, folks, That's all I've got for you this time. I'll talk to you again